Hey, everybody. Welcome to Energy Impacts with David Blackman. I am your host, David Blackman, with a scratchy voice this morning, as usual. I can't get past that. I don't know what's going on, but anyway, I hope it's tolerable. With me today is Commissioner Wayne Christian, one of our finest public servants here in the state of Texas, one of three commissioners you are in your second term as commissioner, correct?
That's correct. 8 years I've
Yeah.
been there so far.
8 years, and that's tremendous. It's a thankless job to a large part being on the commission. I've dealt with every railroad commissioner since about the mid 1990s, and I always appreciate the sacrifice y'all make being away from your families and running what is, in my view, the finest oil and gas regulatory commission, not just in the United States, but anywhere in the world, and has more experience, more history, and really the best set of regulations, most comprehensive set of regulations related to the industry, and they're regulations that make sense and allow the industry to grow while still protecting the public from any unfortunate impacts from what is an extractive industry. So I really appreciate your service, Commissioner.
Well, I appreciate it, David. And interesting thing, just real quickly, is that I think you reflected the idea that oil and gas, of course, the current system that we've lived under for about 40 years, from Al Gore, John Kerry, all that bunch on, has really bashed oil and gas and said we are for polluting the environment. The Railroad Commission of Texas, which is, again, like you say, over 1,000 employees all over the state, 16 offices. People come from all over the world of how to properly do minerals, oil and gas, and other minerals. It started as an environmental organization. We didn't start that way. It started as a railroad group, and then right after World War II, there was a lot of trouble in Kilgore, Texas, the East Texas field that sent 80% of the oil and gas to our forces. And Winston Churchill says, quote, the war was won on a sea of oil from East Texas. But during that drilling, Kilgore, Texas was 1 yard, the next yard, all oil derricks, mud in the roads, oil running down the ditches, literally. And the legislature took the Railroad Commission of Texas, since the railroads were kind of transitioning, and said, okay, give these guys the job of cleaning this mess up. So we really were the first environmental organization to clean up oil and gas, probably on Earth, maybe, but definitely the United States, right after World War II. And it's funny because people look at us as being unfriendly to the environment,
Right. And that issue, for people who don't know the history in the East Texas field, it became such a serious problem there in and around Kilgore, that the governor at the time had to call in the National Guard. He actually activated the National Guard to come into those communities and the surrounding areas to restore order and to begin to enforce what the Railroad Commission was doing. And so it was a really historic event, and and there's been so many things like that in the commission's history. And of course, most recently, it's been Texas being the center of the oil shale revolution. Really, the natural gas shale revolution started here in the Barnett Shale, and more recently, we've had the Eagle Ford and the Permian Basin, come alive and really dominate the national production picture. I was looking back at just preparing for this, looking back at historic records, and I found that in September of 2008, the whole country in the United States, our total production was about 3.7 million barrels of oil today. How far do we exceed that just in Texas this month?
Yeah, it's amazing. In a month's time, we exceeded. Just in the state of Texas.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people don't understand. We're 40% of the national production, and it's 40% of our state budget. Economically, I think a lot of the citizens don't understand what oil is. Every country that has oil is richer than every country that doesn't have oil. And another fun fact, every rich country is cleaner than every poor country. So that means the more oil you have, the cleaner your country. Now, people can't digest that.
Yeah, and it's a message I've tried to, transmit, communicate to people whenever and wherever I can for many years, and I know you have too. It's a hard thing for people to understand just how important the oil and gas business has been to America and to not just sustaining our current way of life, but creating it over
Yeah.
the.
Yeah, they're not. Most people are not aware. They hear constantly, and we're guilty of that in our political realm in Texas and in the industry itself. Oh, we do more transportation. The more oil we have, the lower your gasoline prices. Blah blah blah. Gasoline is only one product. I mean, we're talking about 97% of consumer products are from oil and gas. 97% of consumer products. It's literally 80% of the world's energy. And people keep talking about, well, let wind and solar, the renewable, the clean energy replace oil. And you're sitting here going, electricity is only one product of the 97% of consumer products oil and gas are. And by the way, the only product wind and solar has is one, electricity. And so that means if you shut down oil and gas, you shut down medicine, you shut down clothing, you shut down much of the heat. 80% of the world's energy is from oil and gas. And wind and solar are one product, electricity, which is only 5 to 6% of world energy. Yeah. And so I think the people just don't understand how you look at these David, I look at these historical photos I enjoy of, say, Dallas in 1875 or Austin or any town, and you'll see horses and buggies, and you'll see people all in their hats and the only difference between those photos and horses and buggies and today is oil and gas. That's it. Yes. That's what's given us modern society. And people are saying, oh, let's take all that away. Well, just, honey, move out in the backyard and put yourself in a pup tent for about 3 days, and I guarantee you'll be in after 24 hours. And that's oil and gas.
That is true. That's absolutely right. And you mentioned the power grid. And of course, we have had, I think one thing we ought to touch on here is just, I think the last time you were on with me on this podcast was like 2022. I was just shocked when I figured that out. And that's terrible. I'm sorry about that. I won't let that much time pass again. But we were, in the process of, you guys were in the process of reforming what happens on the power grid. Railroad Commission intimately involved in all that. And since that time, we have experienced freezing events, severe freeze events every winter since then. And over the last 2 winters, the grid has just hummed right along. And I think people need to understand that is by and large in part to the reforms that were implemented by the legislature and the Railroad Commission, PUC, ERCOT, after that horrible winter storm Uri in 2021. And it's really been a pretty significant success story, hasn't it?
So far it has. The trouble with this is, David, that we've spent in Texas, I think, some unwise policies. What happened in Storm Uri, and the Wall Street Journal carried a little piece I had a month after Uri. And basically my comment then as the chairman of the commission was, we spent so much time and money on unreliable energy, we let the pilot light go out on reliable energy. And that's what happened in Uri. Now, the sad truth is ERCOT's done a great job adjusting and getting emergency procedures, and we've cleaned up a lot and done a lot. We've prepared for that storm in the last 5 years, but we've increased population, which has increased demand for electricity and everything else in Texas, 1,000 people a day. We have, though, retired natural gas electric generating facilities. We've retired lignite coal reliable energy facilities. And guess what we've become? We've become the nation's #1 state for both wind and for solar. And yet we proved during Uri that wind and solar can't do it. They're not reliable. And so I'm very concerned we're moving. And I think what we've gained is we now, unlike 5 years ago, and we've got more wind and solar, less coal and gas, and no new nuclear. We've set back and reduced our reliable energy sources in the state. And so now we are looking at rolling blackouts. And we didn't have to worry about that 10 years ago in Texas. And so we can't increase the demand, like the population and the AI and all the new stuff that's coming, and expect more windmills and solar panels to fix it. That's an impossible dream. And I'm afraid we're going down that path in Texas.
Yeah, I am too. And I've been very optimistic that Congress was going to repeal the IRA subsidies for wind and solar. Unfortunately, the Senate, including our Senator Cornyn, are monkeying around with that language, and they're about to change that provision to give, I mean, put in a deadline, a retirement date that is meaningless, just like we've had. I'm afraid we're about to set up those subsidies on the same path that we've had the ethanol subsidies for 30
Well,
years.
let me tell you, David, state of Texas legislature just completed, and they want more of that money. They
I
want
know.
more of our grandkids' money out of that Inflation Reduction Act, which is a total unholy scam against our kids and grandkids and the economy. I mean, we had one bill that Senator Kevin Sparks from out in Midland authored, and Jared Patterson, that would take away wind and solar have to promise a certain amount of electricity to the grid for reliability. Well, gas and nuclear and water have the same thing. They guarantee no matter what, we're going to provide this is how much electricity we're going to provide for the grid, or how much energy we're going to provide to produce electricity. Guess what? If wind and solar, the sun don't shine and wind don't blow, oh, no big deal, no penalties, nothing negative. But boy, you let coal or natural gas or nuclear or water not meet their goal, and there's significant fines against that industry. Well, they had a bill that would equalize that playing field so everybody was accountability. The Texas legislature, not New York, unlike our federal friends in Washington administration, killed the bill. Why? Some of our good Republican majority legislators had too many wind promises in their districts. Right. And their local folks were saying, we want the money out of our kids' tax money. It is a total scam. So that I'm not real happy with some of the results of our legislature. Overall, it was great, but the legislative session was we did not join Donald Trump and his administration in this move to clean up the unreliable energy and the waste and scams that all this clean energy and lower carbon, which is all a scam for more dollars for rich people and billion-dollar corporations that use the money to get tax credits so they don't have to pay taxes, so the rest of us have to pay more taxes.
Right.
And all this are just layers and layers that our legislature supported this time, as our good EPA director, our good Department of Interior, our president are all trying to reform this in favor of reliable energy. Texas did not participate.
Well, you mentioned that the legislative session was generally successful. I totally agree with that. I share your concerns about them killing that one bill, which would have been just a tremendous change. And I just don't know how we ever get a majority in the House that is ever going to do the right thing there. If we can't do it in this political environment, it's kind of hard to see when we can. But overall, it was a good session. It's easy. It's a lot easier to have a good session of the legislature when you start with a big budget surplus provided by the oil and gas industry and a big rainy day fund funded by the oil and gas industry. But I wonder, from the Railroad Commission standpoint, how did your specific budget request go? Is the commission going to be fully funded for the next 2 years?
Yes. In fact, the legislature was very good to us on funding. They're very good to us. We got to think $100 million for capping orphan wells. A lot of people are very concerned about that. Yeah. So, and for the past 8 years, by the way, just to let people know, we have exceeded the amount of orphan wells that we have plugged that the legislature has required. So we've done more than they've asked every session on plugging orphan wells. And a lot of this, I think the public gets all worked up again by the misinformation of some of our friends in the media. I won't say friends, our relations, our relatives.
We won't name any names,
media,
but
right?
yeah.
I won't say friends, but our other media. But they think that, well, all these wells are just orphaned and all this. Number one, a lot of these wells they complain about in West Texas are water wells that have been orphaned. And they may have been drilled by an oil company years ago. And so now they're breaking down. The chemicals going bad. And all of a sudden, they say, oh, my goodness, this is a well here. And why isn't the Railroad Commission fixing this well? Eons ago, back in the 40s and 30s, whenever drilling started in oil and gas in West Texas, then these companies would drill a well, they'd hit water. So it was a dry hole, no oil and gas. But the farmers wanted the water in West Texas for their crops. And so the legislature passed a bill that said, okay, if the oil company gives for free to the farmer this water well, that was a dry well, was never an oil well, it was just a hole, then the liability is released. And so only TCEQ can fix water wells. So in the newspapers, it's all these thousands of abandoned wells that the Railroad Commission won't fix. Well, we can't by law. It's water wells. They're not oil wells. The second point that's very fearful of the budget, that they were very generous to us, but what's happening, David, is the infrastructure in our state is starting to crumble after 100 years.
Yeah.
You got many of these wells that we capped correctly a long time ago. The cement's just breaking down. And we have the million-acre fire that we had up in the Panhandle just about a year or so ago. It was caused by light poles. They originally thought it was maybe oil wells out there, oil pumps that were just a spark came from a pump. No, they were light poles that the creosote poles are 75 years old. They fell down on some of that tumbleweed and sadly terrible fires. But this is infrastructure. So we had one water well that we worked with that cost us over $10 million of our budget. Now you understand, and this was a crumbling. And they say, well, why didn't you go back to the original company of the oil company? It was oil well. Why didn't you go back to the original company? We found it was done in 1948. It was a husband and wife independently drilled the well. Okay, so only, and that's what's frightening, is only the taxpayer is going to have to fix things like that by us. So that's why when they say they gave us $100 million to cap abandonment, that's great, but a few of these $10 million broken wells and that budget goes real quickly. So it's a challenge, and yes, the legislature was generous to us, but we've got new challenges with just decaying infrastructure in Texas.
Yeah, and it is $100 million just doesn't go as far as it used to.
Yeah, it doesn't spend like it used to.
Right. We have actually an interesting comment here from Rodney McInnes that imagine a religion that would be based on false notions, demanded everyone adopt it and sacrifice, and the religion limited freedom and stole from the people. That would be the climate change religion. That is
exactly
spot
true.
on. That
and
is
by the way,
spot
it
on.
is a religion. It is faith. These people.
Oh, totally.
Understand, we were talking. There's all kinds of examples I'm sure that you've gone through. But even if you improve the environment for people, the greenies are against it. Why? Now, this is because they're for what's best for Mother Earth. For example, there was one particular situation where I know that when I was in the legislature, that this group was trying to fix a waterway to get to more agriculture, to get better water to crops from one location to the next. So we're going to improve the waterways and improve it. The environmental folks who are a religion that say we worship Mother Earth and understand what they're after, they're not for what is best for man. They're over what's maintenance for Mother Earth. That's a religion. So they were against improving water flows for farmers, for men, and for our children for more food, and would make it better for mankind because we were disturbing Mother Earth. That's why they are not for uranium and nuclear electric generation. It's cleaner, more effective, better, every rule you got, and cleaner. Then why aren't the greenies for it? Because, and it's quoted by their leaders back during the time of Al Gore, originating this mess, working with this mess. They say, we can't trust mankind with that much power.
Wait, these are the same people that want to do geoengineering, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a religion. And it's like worshiping Baal. They erect their windmills and solar panels and bow at them. Literally, You can't
make this stuff up. You really can't. I use that line and probably 10 times a week in stuff I write on my Substack. You cannot make a lot of this stuff up.
You take Texas, and Texas is supposed to be conservative, right? We're right-wing, big cowboy hats. And we have spent this is Texas Public Policy Foundation, good research group. Yes. We've spent $30 billion to Red China for windmills, solar panels, and batteries. From the state of Texas, federal and state taxes, $30 billion. And I'm sure our friends in China are doing great things with our tax dollars from Texas, right? $30 billion. And we bring over windmills and solar panels. Now, let me give a quick example. One windmill, we'll take an oil derrick. Oil derrick will last 50 to 70 years, take about $30,000 on average to take down and clean up, okay? One windmill that we're spending $30 billion for the last 30 years, it lasts about 10 to 15 years and takes $1.25 million to take down. Right. Get this, the cost of $1.25 million for an electric generating thing that's unreliable only when the sun shines and wind blows is going to stop after 10 years to 15 years for $1.25 million, whereas an oil derrick will last you about 70 years, 50 to 70 years for a cost of about $25,000, $30,000. Now,
Right.
but we're investing our money in more windmills and solar panels.
Well, I think this brings up a really great point. I think we have a looming, really severe issue here another 5, 10, 15 years down the road, as all these wind farms end their useful lives.
Yes.
Where's all that steel and concrete and the windmills and the 100 or 300 feet long blades? Where are they going to go? This is outside of Sweetwater, a blade
Yes.
graveyard. So you get to the end of life of one of these wind farms. It's on, the original developer has sold it and it's probably been changed hands and ownership 3 or 4 times. The final operator goes bankrupt. What happens to all that steel and fiberglass and aluminum, all those tall towers with the turbines and the blades? Who's going to dispose of that? There's not a rainy day. I mean, not a plugging fund, similar to what
That's
we
right.
have in the oil and gas industry that the Railroad Commission is going to do. That stuff's just going to stand there and deteriorate, right? I mean,
That's right.
Nobody's going to be responsible.
And again, $1 million a piece to take them down and haul it off to a place there's no place to haul it. That's crazy. Let me give you another environmental fact. I call it Texas Parks and Wildlife that does our parks and wildlife across the state of Texas. I talked to their chairman and said, Christian, it's not as much the hauling off of that stuff. Said, think of the environmental cost to us. Parks and Wildlife says because they are exempt for both Endangered Species Act, they can kill all the eagles they want to out there. Oil and gas can't do it, but they also are exempt from the Poisonous Chemicals Act or whatever that is. So the chemicals, this is Texas Parks and Wildlife, not us. They say that the chemicals that are being used to clean the solar panels and the windmills make the land useless for at least 100 years, as far as they can predict, for any agricultural, hunting, any growing crops, anything. So they're destroying hundreds of acres for at least a century and calling that green. And this is Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Right.
So the insanity of this thing is just goes, you and I can talk all day long on how can we possibly do it? And the reason we do it, back to it, is the money. We want the money. The government wants the money. Our local communities, let me tell you, we're griping at our state reps, we're griping at our congressmen, griping at our leaders for allowing this stuff. Why do they do it? Because you and I gripe as citizens, average citizens in our state. They gripe and groan about these state reps who spend all this money in the budget and this, that, and other. But you let my local representative bring me home a big windmill and solar panel from my backyard, and it's going to bring a little money in here and a job or two. Well, whoa, he's wonderful. He brought us the money. Yeah. I had dinner with a couple of our congressmen in Washington a couple of weeks ago that represent the largest refining area in the state of Texas, okay? And I was telling you about this carbon capture scam. You got Oxy out in West Texas that's built at $2 billion, $1.5 billion the government, our grandkids gave them to build this thing out there to capture capturing carbon dioxide. And they're going to capture carbon. By the way, carbon dioxide, if you'll look, and at least this is debatable. It's not subtle science on sides. Okay, it's debatable. Debatable is on my side that I've seen carbon dioxide adds moisture, feeds plants, makes more food. That's what they put in greenhouses, carbon dioxide, okay? It's also, carbon dioxide is 0.004% of the environment, of the atmosphere, 0.004% of the atmosphere. Not only that, but how much of that 0.004 is created by mankind? 3 to 6% of 0.004. Okay, so it's like nothing. But we are paying tax dollars to build this plant out there for $1 billion a day corporation that makes money at that rate. We built it. It's there, and then we granted them rights to pump it in the ground. Okay, so in Midland, Texas, where they're experiencing earthquakes, and we're trying to stop all the pressure rise we possibly can in the ground, here goes the federal government giving Oxy permission to do it. And they applied 2 weeks ago, David, for additional pressure to put more of it in the ground. Now, if any place ever needed more pressure under the ground, it's Midland, Texas, right? Now, understand this too. Not only did we pay for the factory to go there, We give them carbon credits, tax credits for every
Right.
bit of the carbon dioxide they stick in the ground. So you got $1 billion corporation that we're paying tax dollars to stick a fertilizer in the ground and increase earthquake potential in a seismically active area. And we're doing that all with the taxpayer dollars. And they're going to do that now and build these facilities all over the state, as is Exxon going to do it, who built one in Beaumont. So they're going to sit here and get tax dollars paying for these facilities from the Inflation Reduction Act. And they're going to give tax credits, which means $1 billion a day corporations are going to pay less taxes. And who has to pay the difference? So they're using our money to get tax write-offs so that me and you, our kids and grandkids, have to pay more taxes for government. Now tell me where there's a good rule in that to capture a perfectly good fertilizer and stick in the ground. That is insanity. And our legislators are approving that in the state of Texas.
Including many Republicans, right? I mean, in the House.
Oh, but they led the fighting that bill on Kevin Sparks,
right.
You know, to level at least the playing field. At least it was more level on that.
Right.
So no, we got those folks, and the same, and by that, they're our friends. I'm really big. We have a good legislature. They're good friends. And like Ronald Reagan, I think, made sure that we as Texans need to learn. If you're 80% of the time, you're not a 20% enemy. They're friends of ours, but they're uninformed. And one thing I've seen is that, sadly, the people talking to our legislators are not Texans, that when they make energy policy. Why is that? I remember when we had Storm Uri and we had Turk, which was an emergency group that came together, as you mentioned earlier, to come up with answers, how we clean up. That was the emergency group. And I remember I was vice chairman, and they'll probably boo me on this one, back in the Texas House when Phil King was chairman, regulated the electric industry. Why? They told us at that time that it was because free market competition would bring the prices down to their consumers, our voters. Yeah. And so, okay, lower electric cost, and they would develop smart meters and all these new things and make it more efficient. And sure enough, we deregulated because they told us we were going to do more for our ratepayers, our shareholders, our voters, okay, as elected representatives. Well, you had all this competition on television everywhere. Call us for lower electric rates. Call us for lowering your rates. Lasted a year or two or three. And then we came in for Turk after Storm Uri to these groups. And the same companies said, well, our shareholders all love this green movement, and we have to do what our shareholder says. So all of a sudden, in that period of time, electric companies were doing what was for their payers. Got it? Now it's their shareholders. And so what I'm saying now to our legislators in Texas, the big seven and the big electric companies have 10 times the lobby in Austin, Texas, as do the independents. And a lot of people don't understand the smaller independents do 80% in the United States of the drilling, not the big seven. It's independent, smaller companies, these independent guys. 80% of the drilling, more importantly, 90% of the exploration. These big companies don't do as near the exploration as do our independents. So here we are. We have 10 times the lobby up there talking to our elected legislators as do the folks that's doing 90% of the development of new resources, which decreases your prices. The more you got, the more supply, it equals the demand. But so that means, who do these electric companies represent? They're shareholders. How many of their shareholders are citizens of the state of Texas? Very percentage low, 10%, 15% of these international corporations. So that means we're making energy policy in Texas on non-Texas citizens' desires. And I think that's a big point we need to understand, that I learned from this electric deregulation, where I was involved at the start and on the Turk after Uri. They don't listen to our voters, these electric and oil companies. They're listening to their shareholders, who are by large majority not citizens of Texas. So why the punk are we making energy policy on international people's benefit? And that's what's going on. I think we need to review in Texas.
Yeah, I think we do too. I totally agree with that. And it brings, you mentioned the independents versus the majors, and what we see happening now. I want to get your opinion on this. In the Permian Basin is big consolidation now. Chevron and Oxy and ExxonMobil keep gobbling up smaller companies. Bigger companies are gobbling up the smaller companies, and it's motivated a lot by economies of scale that enable these majors to produce that oil cheaper than the independents can do now. And so I understand what the motivation is, but ultimately you're going to end up with half a dozen big producers basically producing everything out there in West Texas. We also have this prevailing wisdom that the Permian Basin overall production has now peaked and is now embarked on a slow decline. I tend to disagree with that. I don't think that's because the resource isn't there. I think it's just because there's not much incentive to drill wells right now at the prices we had before this dust up in the Middle East. And I think we're going to go right back down in prices into the low 60s once that plays itself out. But I wonder what you see as the future for the Permian Basin. You're in a position where you're seeing everything happening out there and have responsibility for regulating the industry. What is your view? Has the Permian Basin peaked?
David, I agree with you totally on what you just said. There's still plenty of oil in the ground, oil and gas in the ground. There's plenty of it out there. This is an economic matter. And what happened with drill, baby, drill, frankly, is while I am for Trump's administration, the direction they're going, just thank God for them. But this drill, baby, drill, when he says inflation should be cured by the price of oil is the major factor, I think that's not going to work. And the reason is, as that price comes down in the 60s, there is no profit to the companies. And so the companies are doing the wise thing. They're laying off people. They're stopping production. And at this lower price, they're buying back shares of their own company with the money they would normally be putting in or working out there. Secondly, the problem we had of these big companies, now the independents are getting, for them, they're buying them up like Pac-Man in the Permian Basin. They're sitting, the big boys are gobbling up the independents, the smaller guys. And as I go back to the other stat I gave you, who does 90% of the exploration for new oil? It's the independents. The big boys don't do it. They Pac-Man that they're doing now, strain it out, use what they got, and then move elsewhere. So that means we are increasing demand with all the AI, increased population to Texas from New York and California. So the demand's going up tremendously. At the same time, the profits are down, and the profits make the companies legitimately by the free market stop producing oil. So Trump's idea, I think, and he's much smarter than me and may know way deeper for sure. But if he keeps doing this and the oil comes down in price by making the Saudis pump more, negotiating with them and getting the price down, you're going to stop the production, which means demand's going up, supply coming down, and that's going to hit a peak to where here comes inflation again. And I think he's going to cause himself worse problem by this idea that oil prices are controlling all of inflation. I think there's going to be a long-term, backlash on that. And that's what you see. People are stopping production, but it's not from lack of oil. It's from they can't make money doing it.
Yeah, and the basin also has a very long future. I mean, people don't, I think most people don't understand just how long the life of that basin is going to be with the opportunities for secondary frac jobs and re-entering wells and drilling infill wells on lower spacing in the future and things like that. This thing's going to be around 30, 40 more years, right?
Oh, David, just remember, I mean, I know you're not old enough to remember, but I remember when Jimmy Carter got on the television in a pink sweater. Now, I don't remember. Hey, I don't remember pink sweater because I had a black and white TV at the time. Okay. So I didn't know it was pink. Okay. But I remember Jimmy Carter being there and telling us we had 8 or 9 years of oil left and we just need to change our lifestyle and increase the temperature on our thermostats. And legitimately, that's what science was then. But you take mankind out of this scenario. I think if you'll Google the internet, and I'll go back to something that you won't remember because you're too young, is when Al Gore invented the internet, right? Yeah. So when you go back to what Al Gore invented, get the internet and Googleize it or whatever, you'll find how much oil is remaining, how many years of oil is left in the United States. And it comes between 300 and 500 years. And so we're not running out of oil. Every time we learn to produce, become more efficient. And by the way, what industry has made this more efficient, cleaner than any other industry anywhere on earth, I believe is the oil and gas industry. They're blamed with climate change and all this. And let me tell you, just real quickly, some stats. EPA has a stat that I love. It says the last 30 years, we have decreased all the poisonous gases in the United States by 80%. Plus more efficient with what oil we have, from Jimmy Carter's 9 years now to maybe 500 years estimated. That's a slight change. What's the difference in the two things? Technology of the greatest industry of the United States, the cleanest industrialized nation on planet Earth. And they're trying to shut our guys down, the clean guys, so that China and the Saudis and others, which are dirtier than we are, Russia and Iran, they're trying to increase them doing the supply and thinking that's going to fix it. Even Joe Biden, one of the greatest minds, articulate statesmen in my lifetime, Joe Biden, right? In his second address to Congress, you can look it up on the Googleizer. You can look up Joe Biden says we are 20% of the world's environment. The rest of the world is 80%. If we did everything right, it would make no difference. Joe Biden's quote, and the next quote reflects his intellect. He says, that's why I'm rejoining the Paris Accord. We need to be an example to the rest of the world. So we're going to lay off thousands of workers, cost us billions of dollars, stop our lifestyle because it makes no difference. And that's Joe Biden's quote. It will make no difference.
And he's right. I mean, that was one thing he was right about. There wasn't many. You got that one right. Listen, we're well over time here. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Commissioner. And I promise you, it's not going to be 3 years before I give you a call again.
Well, David, thank you for the work that you do of getting the truth out there, and so few are doing it. And God bless you for standing up for our God-given gift in the state of Texas, which is the largest supply of oil and gas. If we were a nation, we'd be number 3 in the world in oil and gas production in Texas. So God has blessed us, and thank you for leading the good fight to preserve that. Thank you, brother.
Well, same to you, Commissioner, and everybody. Thank you. I'm sorry we didn't get everybody's comments in, but we were moving along really fast here.
Too hot air,
try to do better
guys
next
here. You
time.
can't get in our conversation. You know?
That's right. That's
Don't disturb us.
But thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll be back with you soon. I'm David Blackman, and that's all for now.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner.